Conversation now. The 61st Munich Security Conference began on Friday in Germany. Now, the event brings together policymakers and experts to tackle urgent global security issues. This comes at a time when multipolarity is rising in global geopolitics and is becoming more complex. Around 60 heads of state, 150 ministers and leaders of major international organizations are attending. Now, discussions cover key topics such as global governance, climate security and ongoing regional conflicts. Now, the decision made at the conference have the potential to shape future global security policies. Legal expert Ottilia Maunganidze is joining us live from Munich to, of course, share her insights with us on our video link. Thank you so much for your time on the agenda this hour. Let's get straight into it. I mean, what are some of the key takeaways from the discussions at this year's Munich Security Conference?
So among the key takeaways is, one, that we are living in an increasingly fragmented world, a multipolar world, if you will, but not in the way that we've always thought about it, a space in which new partnerships need to be formed, in which old allies, let's say the United States and Europe, may need to renegotiate their relationships because of tensions between them. For those that have been following the MSC, we heard the Vice President of the US, J.D. Vance, effectively scold Europe for how it is dealing with democracy, how it's addressing questions on the ground, and how it's dealing with issues around migration. So that is the primary takeaway. The other, though, is that in the reshaping of these strategic partnerships, continents like Africa or individual countries like South Africa will possibly become some of the new potential partners, stronger for the African continent, but also for Europe as well. And I think with South Africa hosting the G20, it's no doubt that South Africa should maximize on this opportunity that's been presented to them.
And you just touched on Africa, South Africa to be specific. Now, South Africa's regional political and economic weight and its unique soft power, has derived from its history of democratic transition. It's no secret at all that Pretoria has been long perceived as the natural leader of the African continent and an international authority as well, and has now shaped and shifted, the move in these conversations. I'm keen on finding out from you, how has this assisted in swaying conversations, how we want them to be going and how we want them to be progressing?
So over the past 5 or so years, this position for South Africa, both from a soft power point of view, but as what's known as a middle power, has been sort of ebbing and flowing. But increasingly over the last year, we have seen more strong foreign policy positions coming out of Pretoria. We've also seen clear stances around backing the rules-based order, if you will, around constitutionalism, around the centrality of institutions. This is a message that is definitely resonating here in Munich, particularly with European partners who feel that the rule of law, rather, is under threat. Now, what South Africa needs to do, I suppose, to maximize on that is in this year where it's chairing G20, to match both the conversations on democracy and the rule of law with those around economy and development. Because, of course, it's no secret, South Africa is a developing country on a developing continent. So pushing the economic and development agenda, trade in an era of increased trade tariffs will definitely be the way forward. And the South African delegations that have been here, both from the Department of International Relations, from intelligence, as well as from Parliament, have really been sending this message quite clearly that South Africa, middle power as it may be, will definitely be punching a little bit more above its weight going forward.
And here's the thing, Ottilia, I think there's this perception that President Mandela's successors have in a way driven an anti-Westernism sort of stance, which has sort of also put a damper on things, if you may. Now, the country's international stature itself and potential is a bridge builder between the global north and the south has also dwindled. How do we make amends on this front?
Well, I'll use one example. South Africa right now is part of a Hague group that is seeking to advance international institutions, including the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, against threats to both those institutions. Now, those are key fundamental elements of how we see the Western order, so to speak. But this hasn't been without a criticism, both internally but also externally. Now, what South Africa perhaps needs to do is it needs to communicate better. So when there are challenges to its leadership or allegations around some of its partnerships, be it with Russia in some instances as part of BRICS, South Africa needs to be in a position to better articulate its foreign policy positions and to better articulate why it holds these positions. I mentioned earlier that over the past few years, there's been an ebbing and flowing of South Africa's standing. And I think now is the time to really demonstrate not only why strategic partnerships matter, but why varied partnerships matter. Because if Europe can learn anything from this is you might have an ally today, but depending on developments domestically in your ally country, this might also result in tensions going forward. So make as many friends as you can, but be strategic in the way that you do so.
And now I want us to actually zone it back to South Africa's loss of hard and soft power, and all of this coupled with a contested regional position, which has further constrained South Africa's international leadership role. When you take all of that and you look at the regional conflicts that are escalating in various parts of the world, what strategies do you think are needed to address these crises effectively?
So I think what's really important here is to recognize that just because a crisis is happening further away, that to recognize that it will have, it can have an impact domestically. I mean, in South Africa, we constantly grapple with, for example, undocumented migration as a result of people fleeing contexts in which their economies are in decline or in which there is crime, violence, and conflict. Now, South Africa's role in that instance is perhaps to serve both as a negotiator of peace, but also to be able to assist in stabilization and ensuring security elsewhere, so that those problems do not reach South Africa's borders and shores. But you cannot be the only stable country in your region, so to speak. You also need to be a key regional actor and a continental actor. And I think the discussions that are currently happening at the African Union in Addis Ababa are important discussions, but they're discussions also that seek to ensure that, yes, you can have one country leading, but the message that's coming out is very clear, that countries need to work together in order to achieve those goals, whether it's in the DRC, where South Africa currently has troops, or in the Central African Republic, or in the Sahel, where we're invested in ensuring stability for the continent, but also in the national interest.
It shows indeed that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I chuckle as we have this conversation, busy taking notes here, because now conversations are also pointing towards economic pragmatism and a more centrist coalition that might provide, an opening for a more moderate SA policy or South African policy. How will this help? And what are some of the legal considerations that countries should take into account when participating in international security collaborations?
Right. You can't have a conversation just about security or peace and stability without recognizing that these are the fundamental elements to development in the economy. And I think now, as I mentioned earlier, the issues around trade, around export and import tariffs, around the ways in which countries negotiate each other, both in the security space, but importantly also in the economic space. I can't emphasize that more strongly. But I think the point, and this comes out also from the Munich Security Conference's report for this year on multipolarity, is we are in an era where we do have to buckle up, we do have to be a little bit more pragmatic, and we have to make the right choices that have both a domestic, but importantly also a regional impact. I'll stress this again, there's little value in being a strong economy in a neighborhood of weak economies.
Oh, that's powerful, I tell you. And just before I let you go, how do you see emerging powers like China and India, for instance, influencing the global security framework, and how should the West respond to all of this?
I'm not sure if I would call China an emerging power. I think China is very much a power already on the global stage, and particularly an actor on the African continent. I do also see great potential for countries like India, like Brazil, like Argentina to be influencing global policy. And they're able to do this through various fora, whether it's now through BRICS or through the G20. But increasingly, we're seeing these countries and smaller countries make their voices heard in platforms such as the UN General Assembly and at the International Court of Justice. So it's really about asserting agency more than anything else.
All right, and if you could change maybe one aspect, I'm going to put you on the spot, of global security policies, what would it be and why?
Well, this is going to sound controversial because we're talking about security, right?
Go ahead.
I do think we need to move away from a less securitized approach and perhaps make it a little bit more people-centered. What are our intentions when we seek to enhance security in spaces? This is really a conversation about stability, about livelihoods as well. And I think focusing more there actually ensures that we invest far less in the heavy artillery needed to secure our countries if we ensure that people are safer, the context is more stable, and they're less likely to quite literally take up arms, whether in protest of their own governments or in contesting spaces. So it's a bit of a tall order because I'm calling on people really to focus more on solidarity, focus more on people themselves, and less on the structures of security needed. Then we'll spend a lot less money, perhaps, on defense.
Right, that's legal expert Ottilia Maunganidze joining us there on our video link. This is on the sidelines of the 61st Munich Security Conference, which began on Friday. This happened in Germany.